Hello, everyone. Welcome to Change and Thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Heckelman, founder and CEO of WLH Consulting and Learning Solutions. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and select the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We know that the current pandemic and the impact on the economy is forcing organizations to revisit their business strategy and make, in some cases, small, and in other cases, large, fundamental shifts in how they do business. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Rich Smith, who is a longtime client, trusted friend, and VP of HR Strategy and Management for Kaiser Permanente, which is one of the largest healthcare providers and insurers in the United States. Kaiser is at the forefront of all of these challenges, delivering healthcare both for COVID and other pressing needs, concerned about the cost of care and policy shifts as a result of the election, financial implications of many people losing coverage, all while creating a positive and engaging workplace. Another trend impacting workplaces is the more heightened need to create a diverse and inclusive work culture. As the leader of people strategy and management of the HR function, Rich sits at the table with other executives grappling with these difficult challenges and seeking to chart a new path forward. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you and good to see you again.
And I'm so delighted to have you on today's show to share some best practices and lessons learned on how the HR business partner plays a critical role in crafting and leading strategic change. So, Rich, I'm wondering, before we dig in, if you could first characterize some of the major challenges that are existing at Kaiser and anything else you want to share for context for our viewers.
In your introduction, you alluded to a few of them. The COVID pandemic has really challenged not only Kaiser, but healthcare overall. And there's been some positives and some negatives to those challenges. One of the positives has been that we have learned that much of the coverage that we thought had to be done face-to-face can now be done through telemedicine. Not only us as an organization learning that, but also many of our patients, some of whom said they would never visit a doctor by telemedicine, either over video or by phone, have now done it, and it's been very successful. And even going forward, post-pandemic, we want to incorporate more telemedicine into our business plan. You also mentioned the ongoing challenges, individuals losing coverage as a result of the pandemic, and that has been challenging for us as well. Many people receive their primary medical care through their employer. And if you lose your job, you often lose medical coverage. And so that's had an impact on us as an organization, but we're equally concerned about the impact it'll have on society as more people lose coverage.
You're definitely facing several challenges. I mean, when you talk about telehealth, Rich, I mean, I think it's increased by over 175%, accelerated by many years. So it's great to hear that that's a challenge and an opportunity, but the healthcare loss from employers having a devastating impact. And I would imagine that many of the challenges that are happening in the external environment are forcing really Kaiser to relook at its business strategy. And one of the things that we know from our years of working together is sometimes HR doesn't really have that seat at the table, but you have been incredibly effective in leading the charge as an HR business partner. And so I'd love to get your perspective as a senior leader. What are some of those considerations when you're leading this HR organization as it goes through change?
The HR business partner, I think, is just critical. And I think the role of the business partner is to work elbow to elbow with operations leaders early in the development of strategies. If the operation leader typically connects with her business partner only after a strategic decision has been made, it's really too late at that point. That scenario puts the HR business partner in the position of order taker, executing on decisions that he or she had no part in making. And that's really a difficult position for that HR leader to be in.
It difficult decision, I think the organization loses because when we see large scale strategic change happening, there are usually implications to people, to process, policy. So, them not being the order taker on the back end, but them having that seat at the table during the planning is pretty critical. So what does good look like of the role of HR during the planning of a large scale change?
I think HR needs to be at the table when deciding the nature of the change. Then I think they have to help assess the organization and leaders for their readiness for change. And those are two different things, the organization and then the specific leaders who will be involved, because it takes very specific skills to be a good change leader. I think they have to help build the business case for change, develop the change plan, execute on the plan, and then frankly, monitor how well the organization is doing against that plan.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I know you and I have talked about this a lot through the years, right? There's the planning, the doing, but you just picked up on one of the things that we know. We know that there are two reasons that large scale change fails. One is lack of planning, and the second is the role of the leaders to guide through that transition, right? Because change is something that's done to you. Transition is your response. So if the HR leader is really a tight business partner, they're assessing what's the implementation plan, what's the readiness. So that makes it gel. I'm curious from your perspective that you've been through so many large organizational changes that you've been a part of. I know in your previous position, previous company, and now many years at Kaiser's, what proactive steps do you take to ready your HR organization to lead and support change?
There are a few things, Wendy, and one we've talked about. The first is the identification of the change sponsor. We've both said leadership is extremely important in any kind of large scale change. And then I think the HR business partner also has to establish in the organization that the change process is not linear and that leaders have to stay the course. So for example, in one organization I was in, we changed the sales model, and early indications were that it was not working. But we stayed the course, and it was a full year and a half before we saw the results that we were expecting. But along the way, different leaders at different times wanted to pull out. They started to question whether the decision was right and should we reverse course. Now, there could be times to reverse course, don't get me wrong. We learn, and the more we learn, better we get as we get more knowledge. But just to pull out because there's change fatigue or we didn't identify early on that it's going to take a while is problematic.
I think that that's a really important point, is that especially if the organization or some of the leaders are a little skittish about the change, they may see something going a little awry and want to shut it down quickly. So you're really talking about the role of the HR business partner here to be the shepherd, to say, hey, we'll collect some data, but let's move this forward. And you're really supporting those leaders through this cycle because, as we know, going through change or transition takes time. The research and literature often cite people's resistance to change as a critical factor in change failure. So I'm wondering, what tips and techniques do you have for HR leaders on how they can help their organizations with this? Like, what specific recommendations might you have?
I think helping in the visioning is really important. I think the HR business partner has to help paint the picture of what can be. The idea that there's a new and better normal is one of the keys to reducing resistance. You also mentioned this idea of comfort with data and analytics. I really love that. So you set a vision, but you also have to have the data with you and be able to use it in a facile way to show where we are in the change. I think good business acumen is another important skill, knowing the language of the business, good influence skills, a focus on results, and just having integrity, being trustworthy, and being that trusted advisor. I think all of these things help to fight resistance, and resistance will come about. It'll come about not only in the operations organization, but also in the HR organization. And a good HR business partner is prepared to deal with that resistance regardless of where it comes from.
That's really an important area that you're raising, because sometimes, do you ever experience where some of your HR business partners are a little resistant? So they really have to be so bought in, because if they're going to be there, hand in hand with that leader and shepherding this process, and we know that change is hard and it takes time and it takes resilience, that they've got to be very ready, set. And you just outlined a ton of skills. I'm wondering, do you have advice to those HR leaders or professionals, like how they need to develop not only the capabilities you were just talking about, but agility? Because I would think the change agility and their readiness to partner through change is important as well. So what thoughts you have about that?
I think you learn primarily by doing. So I would suggest that HR leaders volunteer for major change initiatives. And I know it can be risky, but I think you've just really got to jump in there. So for example, right now, many organizations are building their return to work plans. We're doing it in Kaiser Permanente, and many organizations are doing it. They're using cross-functional teams to do this. No one function can do it alone. So there's often HR, operations, finance, legal, IT. I think this is a perfect opportunity to raise your hand, say, I'd like to be involved, and to build and exhibit change skills. The good thing about this particular scenario is there is no playbook. So getting out there and taking some risks is expected. No one can really say you did it wrong, because how many times have we had to bring back thousands of employees who've been working from home because of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic? Nobody's done that before. So I think you just volunteer, you get in, you learn and grow, and be willing to take some risks.
Rich, that is great advice to our listeners. Is what you're saying is kind of lean into the experience here and listen, activate, learn, recalibrate to be able to continue to hone your own HR business partnership skills. Any closing thoughts as we start to wrap up today's podcast? Any other tips and techniques you'd like to share?
Again, this is a unique time in our history. I think it's absolutely a time that HR and HR business partners can play a role in the ongoing strategies of business. We've been kind of handed this, it's been placed in our lap. And frankly, the operations leaders are looking to us. This is our time to shine. So let's not let it pass us by.
I love that. So Rich, thank you so much for joining today and sharing your very valuable insights on the importance of HR partnership as part of successfully driving a change strategy. And if I were to recap, there's a few key takeaways you've mentioned. One, it is critical that HR has a seat at the table for any change initiative, and that they need to be involved from the early planning to assess the organization, as well as the leader's capabilities to lead through this change, and then be there through the execution. The other key takeaway is that HR business partners have to be well skilled in understanding the business and have those business acumen and influencing skills and those collaboration skills in order to help shepherd this effort. The last key takeaway is, at this moment in time, it creates a lot of opportunities for HR to really help shape an organization's future and strategy. Thank you so much for joining today's podcast, Rich. Very much appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you, Wendy. My pleasure.
And if you're an organization needing support to implement a large-scale change initiative or to build change leadership capabilities in your organization, feel free to reach out. I'm Dr. Wendy Heckelman and want to wish you a wonderful rest of the day and see you next week.